Welcome, everybody, to the show. This is Counterclothing Show number 170 for April 22nd, 2024. I wrote 2023 down in the notes. Oops. At least I caught it before I said it out loud. So I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Welcome to the show. Our topic tonight is Command and Control in Wargames. Hopefully we'll get some interesting conversation out of this. We are drinking Glendronach Original 12-year-old. This is a very fine sherried scotch, bottled at 43%, highly recommended. We are clipping Warplan Z. You may have seen the unboxing video of it last Thursday. This is the latest World at War magazine. It is a hypothetical, a German hypothetical, and the Germans get Warplan Z off instead of dropping the whole thing. It looks pretty interesting, and I will be taking this with me to Buckeye Game Fest next week with the possibility of getting a game in the evening or something like that, or at least noodling with it. We'll see exactly what happens. So before we get started, don't forget to like the video, thumbs up and all that, and subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. Massive shout out to both patrons of Ardwulf's Lair, to Aaron Dennis in particular, who stepped up to the swordsman level this week. So thank you, Aaron. And he gave me an invite to the SPI Discord server too, which I didn't know existed. And it's pretty cool. So happy to be on board with that. And of course, another shout out to the sponsor of the Counterclipping Show, Noble Knight Games. We will be hearing from them later in the evening, sometime around the halfway point. Molotov Cockatiel Games, don't get me excited about any Cleveland sports team, because I will be disappointed, and I don't like to be disappointed. So there's that. So there is an affiliate link for the Noble Knight affiliate link in the video description, so check that out. That will help the channel out big time. If you're going to buy stuff from Noble Knight anyway, go ahead and use the affiliate link. I'll get some little bit of a kickback in the form of store credit. I do not have an update on the campaign for the Finnish trilogy this week, because I got it looks like they did part of the month's paperwork, but not all of it. And I saw something on Noble Knight that I said I had to have, and you'll see why when it gets here. I will show it off next week if it does in fact show up. It is not a wargaming thing, at least not entirely. You'll see when it gets here. It's really quite neat, and the price was like $50. It was like, well, I can't say no to this. So we will. It is a Cleveland hat. Yes, I'm from Cleveland. So it's not me, rando from wherever, making fun of Cleveland. The call is coming from inside the house, as it were. So before we get any further, let me mention that Super Chats and Super Stickers are on. It's a good way to get your to support the channel, which is very much appreciated, and it also helps highlight your comment. I am guaranteed to respond to a Super Chat or Super Stickered comment. Can't promise that I'll get to it immediately, because I typically get super duper behind on these things. But I will get to it sooner or later, and I will come up with an answer for you as satisfying as possible. So before we go any further, let's say hello to Adam Mack, Alistair Logie, Bayonet Brent from the Armchair Dragoons, Bill Simodi, Board Gaming Geezer, Carl Fung. Carl, thanks for coming out. Chad Kennedy, Charles Latora, Don Wendnard, Dale Brady, Daniel Silverthorne, Daniel Teets, David Zell, Ed Holtzman, Eric Goebel, Gronyard Rich, the legend himself, Fucko is here, Jeffrey Edwards, John Mogg, John Stanley, Carl Creeder from the Wargame Bootcamp, Kyle Harris, Lee Grant, Mark G, Mark McDare, Mark Herman is here. Mark, thanks for stopping out. Marty Sample is in the house tonight, Meandering Mike, Michael Avanzini, Molotov Cockatiel Games, Palmer Eldritch, Patrick of Patrick's Tactics and Tutorials is here. Paul Sin, Paul, Perfidious Albion, Rob Johnson, Rogue 77, Royce, Ryan Huard. Please say something if I'm saying that wrong, but that's how I want to say it. So Scott Bell, Sean Torno, Stacking Limit, Tony Mammal, Vicky, thanks for coming by, William Bird, and Wolf Dog. Let me apologize to anybody that I missed. It's YouTube's fault. I was actually rooting for this, but I guess arachnophobia won the day on that. So I would have been actually pretty satisfied with had they gone back to the spiders back from like 1905 or whatever it was. Well, he's saying I'm saying it wrong, so I will assume that he is correct and that I am incorrect as usual. So, but in any case, but less wrong than most other people. Well, there you go. So I guess I'm in the upper percentile on that. So we've got some news here tonight, and I'm going to throw a couple of links in the chat. What do I have on the clipboard at the moment? The first of which will be the 2023 public ballot for the Charles S. Roberts Awards for Excellence in Conflict Simulation Games. So if you haven't voted yet, go check the ballot out at that link. Please vote only once. If you vote more than once, we will do our best to consolidate your ballot. We're not going to, there's no sense being punitive about it. It's not like we had hundreds of duplicate ballots. The voting so far is going extremely well. And I'm not talking about the results. Well, I guess I am kind of talking about the results. I'm talking about the number of ballots cast, which I think we've been public for am I screwing this up? About a week? Is that right? Or is it 2 weeks? In any case, we surpassed last year's total of submitted ballots in the last 24 or 48 hours or so. So I'm very happy about that. So that's going real well. We do expect, this is not a promise, we do expect to announce the winners soon after the ballot closes, which is May 14th. The other thing that is going on at the moment, well, not at the moment, we'll talk about the thing that went on at the moment this past weekend in a minute, is Buckeye Game Fest, which is next week. Now, the standard, I threw a link to the Buckeye Game Fest webpage in the chat. I will be there. Brant from the Armchair Dragoons will be there. Grant and Alexander from the Players Aid will be there. I believe Herman Lettman and David Thompson are both going to be there. I have heard something about some other people showing up. We'll see what happens. It's going to be a cool show. We're going to be playing Dead of Winter, GBACW Dead of Winter. I don't really want to get into this, but I would consider the complaints this year to be mild overall. Brant still needs players for the team coin game. This is an 8-player coin game. I'm not going to try to explain it. If Brant, if you want to try and do that in the chat, be my guest. But there's enough going on there that I don't think you can explain it in the chat. So show up for it. It's awesome. It is you are using a distant plane, right, Brant? I imagine you are, since that's what this usually runs at, but it's a cool game. So yes, so there we go. Herman, I think Ryan Howman will be there as well. So there's that. I mean, it's Cleveland. What do you want? Come on. We take what we can get. So, and it is going to be a distant plane. And I'm pretty sure that Grant and Alexander will run some kind of coin thing too. I just don't have any details on what that is. So the convention proper, meaning the board game part of it, starts on Thursday. That'll be next Thursday, not a couple days from now, but the following Thursday. But the War Room opens on Monday. We do expect a very relaxed Monday and Tuesday. It'll probably be us and a few other people in that room at that time. But otherwise, it's gonna be a lot of fun. So I should probably go back and watch some of my own video of Stigler yelling at me about getting the rules wrong. So let's get rid of this. Now, the other news this week is the GMT update, which came out early because Weekend at the Warehouse was last weekend. So let's take a look at that. As usual, I'm not going to read the whole thing off. If you want to read the whole thing, go to GMT's website and read the whole thing. So here's Weekend at the Warehouse, which started on Thursday. There's some pictures of that. There's a whole bunch of people who this update came out last week before Weekend at the Warehouse. So that happened after the update. So bear that in mind. So whole bunch of new stuff that got prototyped up there too. Here's a picture of a bunch of people who were at Circle DC, which was a couple of weeks ago. Huard. Okay, that makes sense. It does look French, but I always want to assume that you're from the same place that Sinestro comes from. Let me put the ticker up. We do have a new, so thank you, Ryan, for that clarification. We do have a new and valid Discord link today in the ticker. So if you want in on the Ardwulf Discord community, there's a link in there. And if you can't parse the link or the link expires or something like that, just email me. My email is in there as well, ardwulfslair@gmail.com, and I'll just send you a personalized invitation. So in any case, there's some news about Coast Watchers. That's Volko Ruhnke's new game. Don't be shocked if this takes over the hobby like Volko has a tendency to do. The news here is that there's going to be a solitaire system in there. I kind of assumed that, but I guess that's official now. GMT Talk, which is GMT's official podcasty type thing. This time they talked to Mark McLaughlin. They've talked to a bunch of other people previously, and you can get that wherever you get podcasts, I guess, but I see Spotify and Apple Podcasts here. I personally use Spotify for that, but you do what you want. All right, so what's shipping and what's next? We'll talk about this stuff down at the bottom. Red Dust Rebellion is done. It is going to the printer pretty soon. There is also this online, I'll throw this in the chat too, actually, 18xx.games. For those of you who are in, if there is anybody into 18xx games, apparently there's this online thing that you can play them online. I had no idea that existed until I read it here in the GMT newsletter. Here's the GMT 1 update with Jason Carr. I think Jason's going to be at Origins with us this year. That'll be awesome. We have, of course, talked to Jason on the Chit Show with Dan, which we will be having tomorrow. Our guest is Clint Warren Davey. We'll be talking about his new game that is in development. We'll talk about it, but it is called 1 Hour World War II, and it looks actually pretty fun and interesting. So that is happening tomorrow. All right, so new and updated Vassel modules, including a whole bunch of stuff that I haven't gotten to play yet. Designer interviews. They didn't put me in here somehow, even though we'll get to that in a minute. But interviews with Mark McLaughlin, David Townsend, designer of Wings for the Baron, which is coming from GMT. Here's a interview with Joel Toppin, Dan Bullock, VPJ Arponen, Carlos Marquez Linares, Joe Dewhurst, more Joe Dewhurst, and here's Volko and Matthias Kramer. So, and there's GMT Online, which is basically their like online articles and stuff like that. I got this email too. Musket and Pike Dual Pack 2 has made its number. So Ben, if you're listening, get that out to us immediately. Would be nice. This was hilarious. I just want to say how hilarious it was that Brandt pushed the button that said publish on the Armchair Dragoons news page, and then 10 minutes later, GMT released their update. Just amazing timing. Obviously have a check to write to the fine folks at GMT. All right, today's new P500 editions, and there's some exciting stuff here. The first of which is Enemy of My... I'm going to have to open these, aren't I? So two of them are reprints, one of which is A World at War. It's going to be the fourth printing of that. It's a solid game. It's very complicated. If you don't mind that, you might find it interesting. And if you're also into strategic level World War II. And Flying Colors Deluxe fourth printing. I have previous printings of both of these. I don't think I need those. The two new items are Enemy of My Enemy, which is an expansion for the British Way, which kind of, so if you haven't seen it, the British Way is actually pretty cool. It's a coin game, but really what it is a coin quad about the crumbling of the British Empire, as it were. And this adds two kind of new games to the quad. Now, how that ties into the campaign, I don't know. But for those who are excited about the British Way, and it has been very warmly received, then maybe you want to take a look at this. So apparently they're out to get everybody at GMT as far as I could tell, but I don't know anything about that. And Bill Simone is going to do Ericord Downfall, Guilford Courthouse, Here I Stand, and the Nations and Cannons RPG. So that sounds awesome, except for Nations and Cannons. I'm actually just kidding. And of course, for me, now this was a immediately push the button type of situation. This is Army of the Potomac. This is Mark Herman's second game in the American Civil War Heritage series. This is the thing that we got a little sneak preview of in the unboxing with Mark a couple of weeks ago. So this is pretty exciting. And what we have here is the continuation of Spotsylvania, North Anna River, Cold Harbor, and the entire 7 Days battles, including Seven Pines, which some people don't count as part of the 7 Days battles, but you probably should, because the rest of the 7 Days battles wouldn't have happened the way they happened if it hadn't been for Seven Pines and Joe Johnston getting hurt. So there's that. Nations and Cannons does sound cool. I heard that, the replay of their game from I think it was last year at Buckeye Game Fest, and it actually did sound cool and fun. I'm just teasing because it's a D&D thing. But this is super exciting. So we'll be happy to get this 5 paper maps, 3 counter sheets, 2 player aids, and a whole bunch of stuff. 2-inch box, which is more than enough if the first volume is anything to go by. So super excited about this. Can't wait for this to come out, and Mark promises that it will be, these will be a regular occurrence from here on out. So that'll be awesome. So back to the update. We have recent P500 editions. We know all about all this stuff already. This also includes Coast Watchers, which is the relatively newly announced game from Volko. Anything that Volko's doing is worth keeping an eye on, in my opinion. Lenin's Legacy, which looks really interesting to me. Musket and Bike Dual Pack number 2, which of course I ordered. Defiance, which is Mark Herman and David Doctor's treatment of part of the current war in the Ukraine. It is not the whole thing. It is just the battle for Kiev, as I recall. So if there's anybody that can pull that off and in a contemporary way, because it's, there's just challenges involving designing a conflict simulation around a conflict that's still happening, right? They're still conflicting over there, and a bunch of other stuff that all looks interesting. Now, they did have some, actually, I think we'll get to that, actually. There's some P500 removals this time. All right, so here is the discussion of the 2 new editions. I do not have the British Way. I'm happy to play it. Maybe I'll get a chance to play it at Buckeye Game Fest. There's actually a pretty good chance of that. And if that happens, then there's probably a pretty good chance I'll just buy it. None of this stuff's coming out probably until very late this year at the very earliest. And that is a very optimistic thing. So here's Brant's explanation of the team coin thing. I wasn't serious about you explaining that in the chat. It's cool. Shut up. Play. All right, P500 removals. So after consulting with the designers, the GMT and the designers have landed on removing these 4 things from the P500 list. Borican, which actually sounded interesting to me, but is probably not a great fit at GMT, maybe. I don't know. Cataclysm. Are we talking about the World War II Cataclysm here? Because I thought that was just a reprint. And then Maneuver and Thunder Alley Crew Chief second printing. Maneuver is Jeff Horger's very abstract, chess-like, and vaguely Napoleonic tactical game. It's played out on a grid. It's actually fairly interesting as that kind of game goes. Not really my bag. I had it at one point. Never actually did get to play it. No, that is his shirt, actually. So, I've played in the Team Coin thing. It's pretty cool. All right, new P5. Now, of course, let me read them off first. So, new P500 teasers from GMT, a space strategy game from an accomplished designer doing his first game for GMT. I have no idea what that is. If anybody does, please speak up in the chat. A new GMT edition of a popular game from Frank Chadwick. Just a moment on that. A sports game. No clue. The first game in Mark Miklos' small Battles of the American Revolution series. Curious to see that. I don't have a position on it at the moment, but I'm curious to see it. So it is, it sounds like that. I think there's a pretty good chance that Borican will get picked up somewhere else. But I hope that it does. I think it's an interesting looking game on a topic that we don't get anything else on. So again, maybe it wasn't working out at GMT, just due to, that there's a certain audience that goes to GMT and keeps up with their stuff. Now, here's the thing. When we mention a GMT edition of a popular game from Frank Chadwick, there was immediately some talk on Facebook about this. And of course, some people, and I get it. I feel for them. Immediately said, "Oh, maybe it's Europa." It's not going to be Europa. Okay. That is an absolute quagmire. And short of like a reimagining, we are not going to see that back anywhere else. Reimagining, at least to the level that Diffraction Entertainment did it. In addition, Frank Chadwick has as far as I can tell, a blanket deal with Compass Games to redo a bunch of Frank Chadwick stuff, most of which is GMT material. The one thing, however, that left one of the couple of things, one of which is Europa, that left GDW was A House Divided, and that's what if I had to bet $5 on this, I would bet that's I would bet that's what it is. It would fit very well with GMT. It is a classic game that deserves to be in print. I don't think that this is the new ETO thing either, because it does say a new GMT edition. That to me says it's a prior game that was published before. So on the other hand, if they put this up, I'll be very interested in this as well. So the sports game, maybe they're redoing Scrimmage. Who knows? I have no idea. So Europa needs an overhaul to 1984 design standards, to be frank, John. I love you, man, but it really does. All right, so coming events. Spring 24 weekend at the Warehouse, that's already over. So if you wanted to go, tough. Game More 3 in Albany, Oregon. This is supposed to be a really good event. If you want to like bring some Decision Games products for Stigler to autograph for you, I'm sure he'll be delighted to do that. We've got Vassel 2024 Forever, which is an immersive weekend dedicated to historical board games. I think this is an online event. I'm really unclear on this, and I don't know. So, Total War is the overall. Yeah. All right. So Carl says the sports game is a baseball game. Hey, I don't know. It could be cool. Who knows? I generally, that's not something I'm going to go for, to be completely honest, personally. But if you are, then cool. All right. So June 8th, SD HistCon second front. This is the next SD HistCon online convention. And then August 8th through the 11th. Boy, Harold's keeping those folks busy. Is SD HistCon East at the U.S. Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island. This sounds like an amazing event, and I'm not going. So there's just too much stuff in the first half of the year for me to add another event in the first half of the year. But we're going to try to get out to San Diego in November. There's a 10th International Twilight Struggle Convention against the stunning backdrop of Kythera, Greece. If this is Kythera, Greece, it looks awesome. I hope the folks going will have a good time. I will not be attending this thing in Greece, as awesome as it would be. Here's Czech ConSimCon 2024 in Prague. That actually sounds cool as well. And the World Series of Board Gaming in September, and this is in Las Vegas. Am I right about that? I think it's in Vegas. It's in Vegas. All right, and here's an interview with Dan Bullock. What else do we got going on here? Here's the Combat Commander blankets. I haven't ordered one of these yet because the money's tight right now, but I'm totally doing this. I could totally see this as a wall hanging. This is the current Cleveland baseball team hat. So don't ask me. I am not the complaint department. Complain to GMT. I mean, admittedly, there's a huge pile of stuff, and they did have Weekend at the Warehouse, like literally starting in a couple of days. So if they forgot it this time, I would be inclined to cut them a little slack. To be fair, I give Europa a lot of airtime, to be honest. It's not all positive airtime, but it's not all negative airtime either. So I think we should recognize how important Europa was, while being realistic about how dated it feels nowadays. So no more Thunder Alley expansion. So that's a second printing, though, unless I'm mistaken. So you could run down the original one. I'm sure Noble Knight either has had it or will have it at some point. All right, so here's the updated Fields of Fire materials that you can just download. Apparently, it's big enough that there's 2 of them. Here's Mark's Rebel Fury video. Check that out. I linked it in the video I did with Mark as well. That looks great. Scott Bell says he thinks there's only 5 or so spots left for Game More, so if anybody was going to that, better push the button real soon. All right, and we got a bunch of Board Games Chronicle stuff. They're doing very fine stuff over there. There's an Ed Beach Games fan group on Facebook. I'm not sure I've noticed that before. And, of course, there's an official one as well. And here's Washington's War back in stock, apparently. All right, not there yet. All this stuff is going to make its number, I'm sure. All right, and here's Grant for Pushing Cardboard and talking to Vez Arponen about presumably, actually looks like Panzer North Africa is the topic in there. So it is. I don't want to derail talking about Europa again because I feel like I've talked enough about it lately, but it is a unique experience. Let me put it that way, and I do not mean that as a backhanded compliment. I mean that exactly what I said. It is a unique experience that is hard to get elsewhere. So, Rogue 77 says we should do a show on conventions. This is a good idea. This might be a good show with Dan, but that would get derailed immediately. All right, so here's the Inside GMT articles. Here's the most requested games. All right, we're up to the charging and shipping. So here's what's shipping now, meaning shipping to you nice folks, not to me, because mine comes out last. Clash of Sovereigns and Clash of Monarchs double-sided mounted map and the update kit for Clash of Sovereigns, because it had some issues, everyone agrees. We have the For the People 4th printing. Again, super duper highly recommended by me. I have a previous printing, but I have ordered the mounted map in 3-inch box because the map is really nice. Although the previous map was nice, but the box is gorgeous. So, and it's 3 inches, so that'll alleviate a little bit of storage pressure. And the Here I Stand 500th anniversary reprint, second printing. So this is like the third or fourth printing of Here I Stand at this point. And then the next charges and shipments will occur sometime in the May 1 to 5 time frame. So for those of us at Buckeye Game Fest, around the end of that. And that is a Jest of Robin Hood and Bayonets and Tomahawks second printing. Bayonets and Tomahawks is another one that I haven't played and probably should. I like Balkan Front or Marina Mercure. As a standalone Europa piece, I think it's one of the stronger games in the series on those terms. All right, and then production outlook. There's some very interesting things here, folks. So all the stuff we just talked about. Also, at the printer, with no ship date yet, is the Downfall mounted map and 3-inch box. I, Napoleon from Ted Racer, Labyrinth, The Awakening second printing, and the War on Terror fifth printing. That is an expansion in its second printing and the main game on the fifth printing. It's a great game. We should all have played that at that point too. Next War, Iran. I'm not sure I knew that was quite this close, or I had forgotten that it's quite this close. That, if for those interested in this topic, that's going to be just as solid as the other games in the series. I'm sure. Normandy 44, fourth printing, and a separate mounted map and 3-inch box. I have a previous printing of Normandy 44. It is a great game, and I am happy to have the paper map, personally, but you do what you want. And Skies Above the Reich second printing and Virgin Queen second printing. I might pick up Virgin Queen because I don't have it. I have played it, and it's pretty good. And it's a little easier to get going than Here I Stand. And Tanto Manta has been getting a bit of a mixed reception, but I do feel like it's going to have legs. So Chad Kennedy says, Fire in the East, Scorched Earth, and War in the Desert are all on the shelf waiting to be punched. Something else always makes it to the front of the line. So the nice thing about War in the Desert specifically is it's loaded with smaller stuff. So if you just want to play out like the Western Desert part of it, just do that. That's a perfectly good scenario. All right, in final art and proofing. So according to their projections, this is 1 to 2 months away from going to the printer. I'll read this whole section. CNC Medieval Expansion 1. Commands and Colors Napoleonics, The Grand Battles. Congress of, which I'm on the hook for. Congress of Vienna, which I should order, looks super interesting. Holland 44 second printing, which I don't need because I have the first one. No Retreat, The Russian Front Deluxe Edition, third printing. What's deluxe about it? The last one was pretty deluxe. I don't know what's deluxe about this. Red Dust Rebellion. Very interested in seeing that as well. Space Empires. All the stuff. So the base game and all 3 expansions, including the new one. I am on the hook for the new one. Talon third printing, which you can integrate with Space Empires, although I don't feel like it's worth the trouble personally. And then in final art and proofing. These are 1 to 2 months away from going to print. Interesting. In final art, and I wonder if this is a typo, because there's 2 sections here that are 1 to 2 months from going to print. So let's assume that that's the case, and that these are a little bit behind the ones that we just listed. Battles of the American Revolution Tri-Pack number 2, which I have ordered. Fields of Fire Deluxe Edition. I think I still have the previous one. Plus the update kit. Plus Fighting Formations, the 29th Infantry Division. Plus In the Shadows. That's a game about the French resistance in World War II. Looks reasonably interesting. Mr. President 2nd Edition and the update kit for that. Seljuk, Byzantium Besieged. Very interesting looking Levian campaign game from our friend Justagard. The Battle for Normandy Deluxe Edition has moved up in the queue, which is fantastic news. I suppose that means it's possible, though, this stuff will be out this year. That would be great if that is the case. The Weimar Republic, which would be the second Weimar Republic game to come out in the recent last year or two. And Zheng He, which I know I'm mispronouncing. David, please correct me if you are listening. So, because I don't speak Chinese and I don't remember enough about Chinese pronunciation that I did take. But that looks pretty interesting. That is a solitaire game about the famed Chinese exploring Admiral Zheng He. All right, in the art department, now we're into the point where I am only going to list off the things that have moved up. The things that have moved up to the art department are Bear Trap, which we've done a designer interview with, so check that out, and By Swords and Bayonets, which is by everybody's buddy Stigler, the happiest man in wargaming. And then in the, now I'm going to point something else out. Where is it? I'm going to point something else out here too. Okay. In the art department, okay. All right, so there's 2 stages of art department here. All right, so let's catch up real quick. Not that close. I want to say the one from Capstone came out mid-2023, so it's been about a year at this point. But, you know, there's parallel design efforts going on, too. Maybe if I promised to supply scotch, I'd be higher up on the list. That's possible. And as Ed Holtzman points out, if you're interested in that Divine Right Kickstarter, now's the time because it's about to end. Sean Lambert says that Weimar has been very popular in his club. It looks really intriguing, but it is a what I would describe as a very heavy political Euro, a heavy to very heavy political Euro. I'm not quite sure whether it's heavy or very heavy, and that's because we didn't get through a single turn of it because we had nobody that we had sat down with it had played it before, and we were all playing other stuff, and nobody was really focused on it. So that is why. So, Chad Kennedy, first of all, thank you so much for the support. But here we have the big news. So, Barbarossa Army Group North 2nd Edition has been in the art department queue for a little bit now, a few months. So that is making its way to us, and it's probably not going to see it until next year. New this update is that Barbarossa Army Group South 2nd Edition has made it to the art department, and this won't be ready until, according to them, early 2025. I want to say that the next thing that they had in the pipeline after Army Group South was a redo of Typhoon, which I would be all over, to be honest. I don't know if they plan to redo Kiev to Rostov and or Crimea. My guess would be no. But hopefully after that, they can get to some of that 1942 stuff that we've been waiting for a good long time. In any case, back up a category here. CNC Ancients expansion number 5, Epic Ancients 2 second printing, moved up this time. Pending artist assignment, meaning, you know, we're still trying to figure out who's going to do the art here. Expansion or Extinction, which is the Space 4X version of Triumph and Tragedy. Triumph and Tragedy is really good, so that's probably cool. Iron Storm and the Guerrilla Generation. And then they've got these 2 18XX games that they're not quite sure what is going on. So super good update here. And we have a bunch of online content creators. Check all these fine folks out. And this list is getting bigger and bigger every month. So, and then here's some art. Here's the board for Hannibal's Revenge. It looks nice. Does it say who did the art here? Mark Mahaffey did the art. Here's the in-progress map for Zheng He. Again, I think this will be pretty interesting. Once again, thanks, Chad Kennedy, for the support. It is much appreciated. So I'm super interested in seeing this and or learning more about it. Here's the board for In the Shadows, and I think this looks pretty cool, too. It's a pretty minimalist map, but there's nothing wrong with that. Here's the Mill Springs map for By Swords and Bayonets. I wonder if Stigler's here. I wonder if we're getting 5/8 inch counters or bigger hexes or something like that in this game. I don't know. I think it would be nice and possibly practical for this particular volume in the series to do that, but I hadn't heard anything about that either. Here's the New Bern map. These are all in progress maps, so don't consider these final, but they certainly this one looks pretty close to final. This one could easily be pretty close to final. And here's Second Rappahannock Station. I don't even know anything about this battle. 1863. New Bern is 1862, and Mill Springs is 1862. So Marty says that the Weimar game from Capstone is very interesting. Only soloed it so far, but have a game arranged for GMT East starting this Thursday. No wonder they're busy. So yeah, it does look neat. It's an interesting topic, and basically, if the Nazis win, everybody loses, which is a good way to design around that particular design problem. Scrolling down through some more here. Here's some counter samples for Next War Iran. Looks like standard 5/8 inch counters for this, or 9/16 perhaps. Here's another one. Here's some sample cards for Hubris. That's Morgan's new game. This looks very interesting as well. It's a point-to-point card-driven game. same it's the Wars of the Alexander's Successors. Let me put it that way. And here's some card samples for Weimar Republic. It's going to be tough for GMT to make their game look as elaborate as the capstone Weimar game. I gotta say. So, but here's the player mats. We've got the Democratic Coalition, the Communist Party of Germany. We've got the Radical Conservatives and Nationals and the Nazis. Okay, so that's going to be a tough design challenge, guys. I got to tell you, I don't know that that's I felt like the solution in the Weimar game from Capstone was a better solution than that, but we'll see how it plays. All right. In any case, we've got project updates and examples. I'm not really going to go through all this stuff, so go ahead and take a look at this. This Infernal Machine actually looks quite interesting as well. Twilight Struggle South Asian Monsoon, which when we talked to Jason about, Jason is Jason Matthews and Jason Carr are the designers for that. That is another Twilight Struggle, sort of smaller footprint Twilight Struggle game. Looks, it's got some interesting sounding mechanics in it. Let me put it that way. Illinois Nazis, exactly. All right. And I do like this cover. I do really like this cover. I think it's a very strong cover. I'm just not sure it's quite as nice as the one from Capstone. Here's the thing for Cross Bronx Expressway and Hammer and Sickle. And here's some people playtesting some stuff somewhere. Here's a Plantagenet, and what else do we got here? So yeah, we've got, that is basically the update. So that is the GMT news, folks. Let's pull this down, and now you can look at my ugly mug for the remainder of the evening as we continue clipping our way through War Plan Z here. So in any case, tonight we are going to talk about, after I take this sip of delicious, delicious scotch. Anyway, we're going to talk about command and control. And this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because at this point, I often will just say no. There are exceptions, of course, but I'll often say no to a game that doesn't have something to model command and control difficulties. I am a big fan of games that do something to model the kinds of command and control difficulties that the actual historical commanders face. Now, there's a number of different ways to approach that. And each of those, the scotch for tonight, Perfidious Albion, is Glendronach 12-year-old. So it is very good, and I'm not even sure how I have any left, to be honest. That's probably should have been gone some time ago, but I actually have quite a bit of booze here, so there's that. People keep giving me bottles of booze too, so there's that. And I don't drink it that fast. So let me pull this down. Is there anything else I wanted to say about any of this? I don't think so. In any event, we got over 200 people watching, folks. Hey, thanks for stopping by. Don't forget to like the video, share the video, subscribe to the channel, and all that stuff. So Molotov Cocktail is enjoying his second to last bottle of the product placement Talisker. I heard about this and I didn't try any of it, but Talisker is awesome. So it's probably good. So, and Rob Johnson says the best aha moment in wargaming that he had was when he discovered a game that took some control away. Jet pull, limited activations, etc. Yes. So I agree completely. Now, recall that for a decent number of people, it was a paradigm shift when they saw the original John Hill squad leader back in 76 or 77 or whatever that was. And when they started playing it and realized that at some point you may lose control of some units that will behave in a sort of mechanized way that's mechanized by the game, rather than doing what you would like them to do or what you feel would be most efficient for them to do. I would assume this is possibly true. So Scott Bell says Rappahannock Station is from Meade's Fall 1863 campaign just prior to Mine Run. Confederates kept a fortified position on the north bank of the Rappahannock. Federals drove it in. And, okay. So, yeah, I mean, these are interesting battles. They're just small, right? That's the only thing. So, Fabrizio, thanks for stopping by. Very good. So, in any case, this is, I think, to me, it's one of the most interesting things, right? I like to see some kind of limitation that makes me make decisions. Okay. And the alternative, kind of the base state of wargaming, or, like in the grand old tradition of old Avalon Hill and SPI games, is that there are no restrictions on command and control. Your units behave exactly how you would like them to behave in the moment. And you also happen to have more or less perfect intelligence on where the enemy forces are and how they are disposed and all that. So you can merely decide. And as important and influential a game as something like Panzergruppe Guderian is, it suffers from this, right? In that, I'll just attack, everywhere where my odds aren't total garbage. And, maybe somewhere you're going to get lucky just by the luck of the dice, right? I will certainly play games like that, but those games are not my preference. I'd prefer to have to make decisions about who's doing what. And as a side benefit to that, if I'm not attacking with everybody, then that tends to play faster than I'm attacking with everybody. And we're going to now spend an hour going through and computing odds and rolling dice onto CRT and all that stuff. So I would just as soon that not happen. Now, once we get beyond that sort of base state of there is no limitation on command control, however, we have a couple of different ways around this challenge. And then we have sort of hard versions and soft versions in much the same way that we might have hard or soft zones of control, right? So we can take a look, for example, and I'm not going to shock anybody by using OCS as the example. OCS is what I'm going to call an economic command and control limitation, in that there is an economy. You get a certain number of points, supply points in this case, each turn. And that could be random, as it usually is in OCS. Not always, but it's usually somewhat randomized, at least. And then you get to choose what to do with those points. You can choose to attack with them right away or save them and build up a big supply stockpile for a major offensive. I like that choice. Some people don't like the points accounting, and I understand why somebody would not enjoy that. It's not something I personally mind. Okay. On top of that, you have and I guess when we say that there's sort of a hard version and a soft version of this, I think no game is going to fit perfect into these arbitrary classifications that I have just set up for the purposes of this show. But the OCS does have certain some ability to operate without supply. There's a lot of things that you can't do with no supply, but you can fight with no supply. For example, you can't attack but you can defend with no supply. And you're defending. You're going to go to low stockpiles, or you are going to defend at half, which sometimes doesn't matter because it's 15-1 anyway, right? You might as well not spend the points. If you are attacking, you must spend attack supply. You must spend combat supply to do that in OCS, okay? On the other hand, John Mogg. So we're going to get to this too, because I think this is sort of the I don't want to call it the perfect command and control system, but it feels appropriate, and it once you get into the flow of it actually works pretty well. Fabrizio, I understand it is 3 a.m. Your heroic sacrifice for making it here for as long as you have is much appreciated. Stacking Limit says OCS is an accounting simulation, and some people will certainly feel like that, right? Because you got all these points that not only you have to spend off the map and then do the points accounting with the chits, but you have to move it around too, right? You can't, sometimes you got to move supply to where the supply is needed. And that's a thing that you're going to have to do a lot, especially in older games. In some of the newer games, so since Third Winter and Hungarian Rhapsody, a certain amount of streamlining has been done to the supply mechanics in these more recent games to alleviate you having to truck supply back and forth on the map with trucks and wagons. That certainly will still happen, but at least like your stuff, like in Third Winter, and it'll work similarly in Forgotten Battles. Most, if not all, of your supply will come in at the front or army HQs, and you can move it around from there as you need, but you don't have to rail it all up or truck it all up from the map edge to get it to the vague idea of where the headquarters is. So that is a plus. Scott Bell says Gettysburg games without command and control lead to what Dean Essig refers to as Panzergruppe Hill as the Confederates overrun. So a lot of Gettysburg games suffer from this, right? I think when I get the Avalon Hill Gettysburg 77, I think it's probably going to have this problem. Unless there are other ways to adjust it other than doing it in command control. You could nerf the Confederate units, for example. I think that's a very ugly solution and one I would probably look upon with great disapproval, but there you go. But yes, and in particular, Gettysburg in particular, I mean, most games suffer from this to some extent, but Gettysburg in particular is going to look radically different on day 2 if you don't have some kind of command and control limitation built in, right? And of course, Dean did what some people, and I may feel like this too, is the final word of get large-scale Gettysburg games with less chance for victory, and he talks about this specifically. And Rob Johnson mentions that Thunder at the Crossroads was a big influence. And, this is back to John Mogg's statement about the writing of the orders. So, Jeff Taylor says that Fabrizio's C3 series is one of the best examples of command and control he's ever played. That's fantastic. That's got a bit different lineage than I thought it did. So I may actually give that another look, but Fucko's got them, so I don't have to go buy them. Thank God. Okay. Mark, Gettysburg, what? So Mark, once again, thanks for coming by. So Perfidious Albion, I haven't played this since the late 80s. In GDW's Assault, each company or battalion has inherent command points for limited maneuver in combat. TAC centers can save command points for major operations. That sounds like it might be interesting. And I wonder if maybe that is it was an inspiration for OCS. I know that Dean was, one of his inspirations was clearly Europa. You can see that, and there's even evidence of that in the current OCS rule book. So Joseph Syverson mentions Javier Romero's modern war games, maintaining supply lines feels like a legitimate way to deal with supply in lower detail games. So I'm gonna transition from the kind of economic model, not that we're modeling an economy, but there is an economy in the game of points that you have to spend to do stuff. We're going to transition from that to Dean's next step, which is BCS, which is a randomized activation. Now, there's a couple of different ways to approach random activations, okay? One, does everybody get to activate, and it's just a matter of sequencing, right? In BCS, it does in fact work like that. Maybe. I guess I'll talk about that in a second. So there you go. This sounds interesting. It says RDF game had a tactical gear shift that control what formation you could be in. That sounds very interesting, actually. So rapid deployment force, as Meandering Mike points out. I never looked at that game. So the way BCS does it, though, is you pick. Now, there's an optional chit pull rule as well in BCS, which I personally don't like, but some people do. And, if that's how they want to play, I'm not going to yell at them. I mean, I will, but I prefer to play without the chit pull because I think it makes me make interesting decisions about, okay, what's going on? And then how does that affect the thing that I'm about to attempt? The selection of activating units is not random in BCS, but the degree to which they activate is. And there are a number of things you can control about how that number works. It is a die roll on a table. You can make sure that your supply lines are intact, supply lines / lines of communication. You can make sure that you haven't gotten cut off or anything like that. That's a big help. If your formation is highly fatigued, it will negatively affect your ability to operate at maximum efficiency. If you are, if you did get some stuff jumped, or if you have your supply lines tangled with another formation's supply lines, then that creates negative DRMs on that roll. What it does is it completely removes that economic layer of, okay, I have points that I'm spending that you have in OCS, and puts it all behind the curtain. And now all you're doing is in a very organic way, making sure that or attempting to make sure that your lines of supply and communication are intact, that they're not tangled either with the enemy or with your own friendly formations and creating giant traffic jams of trucks trying to get up the road past each other. And it boils it all down into a quite straightforward die roll. So, and I found that to be very interesting. Now, conversely, you might have a chit pull game. And I'll use GTS as an example here because there is a pretty good chance that not every formation that gets a chit in the cup is going to get to activate in GTS. In GTS, you save the last chit. When there's one chit left, you stop the turn, and then that last chit becomes the first chit of next turn. So there's a randomized chance that there's at least one formation on the board or one command on the board that's not going to get to activate. Brent says traffic management for logistics is rarely addressed in hobby war games. I'd say rarely, yeah, but maybe more than some people think, because we've got a lot of games on the Bulge where traffic jams were a real problem, or Market Garden where again traffic jams were real, traffic congestion. One little road heading to Arnhem is a legitimate problem. So we have we do have some modeling of those things, but outside of those particular situations, we probably don't see as much of it as we ought to, right? Oh, interesting. Mark says that Defiance has a new twist on the chit pull system, and the end of the turn is not predictable. That's another way to model this, actually, is can the turn end in an unplanned way? And that is a thing that, for example, the Arkley Smith victory game Civil War did. The turn might just end. And if you didn't get everything you wanted done, well, I guess you're waiting then. And I have no problem with yes. Just about every Market Garden game has some modeling of traffic jams, even if it is pretty abstract. But Holland 44 has it. Unless I'm very much mistaken or misremembering, Ardennes 44 does as well. So excellent. Wolf Dog's playing SCS Panzer Battles. Very curious to know how you like that. I did not particularly like it, but it is a chit pull game, right? I think what was getting in the way for it for me was it's like East Front at roughly the same scale that one might see an OCS game. And I was like, I'd rather play this in OCS. So, that was just me. There we go. Mark says that Jim Dunnigan had traffic rules in his Ardennes games, and it's a feature of Defiance, as it should be, right? This is a legitimate thing. Jeff Taylor says GTS has traffic jams as well, with only one unit per hex in column. So yeah, this is true, and Gauss as well, right? Gauss has a sort of sequence. It's kind of built into the sequencing of Gauss. You can't just march. I mean, sometimes you can. It depends on what units we're talking about. Leg units is not a problem. But in Gauss, you can't just march or drive a column of tanks through another column of tanks up the road. You've got to either go off-road or find another route. And going off-road might not be practical at all, particularly in the Bulge where the terrain tends to not be great. So, all right. So, Paul Sin says 65 and 85 have end-of-turn driven cards. End-of-turn driven by cards that's somewhat unpredictable. See, I think this is an interesting way to do it. The question is how comfortable are you leaving that limitation on your ability to command your units to do what you want them to do? How comfortable are you leaving that to a random process? Whether that random process is a die roll or chit pull or whatever. I think that there are people that don't like, for example, GCACW because it feels it's roll and move. We don't want that. Because it feels weird and primitive to them. But that's its mechanism for creating the types of situations where you have difficulties getting coordinated actions off, right? So that is... yeah, that's a good point, too. It's been a long time since I've looked at... I guess it's been a long time since I've played Washington's War, I guess what I mean to say. But yeah, this is true. And there's actually, in War Between the States, the game can randomly end. Actually, there's a table. I think unless the Union player is really kind of screwed up, and it's pretty unlikely to happen where the game ends on a die roll and the Confederates win, but it's not statistically impossible. So. And I didn't like that, but then I started looking at how the points break down, and I'm like, okay, so what you're really doing here is incentivizing the Union to do certain things that will get them the political points so that they're not vulnerable to an end-of-game situation where they lose by random die roll, which would not feel good, right? So, this is true too. This is just a turn, though. I feel like by that point, and for the people, you probably have a sense. I mean, I'm sure there's some games that do come down to the last die roll, but I'm guessing you got a sense at that point of who's winning the game and who's not. So, the supply. I mean, we're not actually talking about logistics here tonight, but I have played Supply Lines of the American Revolution, and it is pretty neat. And I would recommend folks give it a shot. I think Amabel at this point would recommend people try the Southern game before the original, but do what you want in those terms. All right, we need some baggies here. We're storing this in baggies because I don't have a great in-place organizational thing for magazine games at this time. I did, however, this week fire up the 3D printer for the first time in an attempt to kind of start noodling with it. And we did not get it running. I did have a small print job that did fail. It wasn't a big deal. It was a test print, and I've got to continue fooling with it to see if I can get it to work. We'll see. What I didn't have, though, is that problem with the overheating or, whatever the sensor problem was. So hopefully we'll get back to that. In the meantime, I ordered 25 trays from Cube for Me, which will probably be here in a couple of weeks. That ought to be enough trays to keep me busy in trays for a while. I have some, but not too many. Interestingly, the Cube for Me trays will not fit properly into the Flat Decision Games boxes. I'm not sure that, I mean, I could trim them by just a hair and they would, but I don't want to do that. So we're using GMT trays for that instead until I can get the 3D printer working. Although there's plenty of room in that box, I don't need to deal with 3D printed counter trays. I'm going to get the entire game in 3 trays, so it's not going to really be an issue. And maybe a baggie or two for either markers or for the alternate leader system, but we'll see. And of course, we have chit pull. And chit pull, the traditional Eric Lee Smith chit pull mechanism is you have a number of different units, and in order to activate those units, you draw chits out of a cup, and that will tell you what unit is activating. There's a lot of different wrinkles on this, right? Some of them are like if you've played the Dark Valley, for example. Some of the chits will be specific units, and some of them will be like specific types of activities instead, especially for the Soviets. So there's a lot of different ways to wrinkle this, but the important part is that those are French. The important part is you just don't activate everything all at the same time. You activate it when an appropriate chit comes up. I ordered, I think, basically 5 of every tray that they have. So I'll see how this works. It's not a bad idea. I have an idea for magazine games. It's just that I do need trays for them. The 3D printed trays was my idea, but we may or may not get to that anytime soon. Let me put it that way. Okay. All right, Fiddle70 says that the World at War 85 system can also end a turn before everything activates. It does have a mechanic to make sure that the side losing goes on the next turn. Okay, so that's interesting. Now, there's also, I mean, Brant's kind of dancing around this, and I'll tell you, I mean, I said up front that I think this is important, right? I don't demand a specific mechanic, but I do demand some kind of limitations that makes me make decisions about who's doing what. And it's not just everybody's attacking all the time, every turn, as long as I can get a reasonably favorable odds. I don't like that as a general thing. There's some games that I like for other reasons, and that outweighs my distaste for no limitations on command control. And there are some games for which the scale is such that maybe that's not an issue, right? In something like a strategic level World War II, maybe I don't care as much about that, and I don't think I do. But for an for an operational game, which is pretty much my bread and butter, I want some kind of limitations. Now, Roger Hemsath mentions Edelweiss. This is part of the Winter Storm campaign series, and it is on my list of things to get played at some point. I don't know that we'll be getting to this anytime soon either. But Edelweiss is another one of those things that seem to be dancing around some of the same conclusions that Dean Essig came to when he designed OCS. And I don't know to what extent it was an influence. It may not have been, but I'm very curious to noodle with it and see how it does. That said, it is a crazy big map, and it won't fit, and a weird shape map to it. It won't fit on this table, but I'm pretty sure I can play a smaller scenario. So Frank says he's okay with no activation if that makes sense in the era and the scale. Not okay with game activations wildly outpaces the historic timeline. I would think that most people would not be comfy with the latter. I wouldn't, at least where in those situations where I would be able to identify that kind of problem, I would be uncomfortable with, okay, well, we just got, turns are weekly, and I've managed to sail from Pearl Harbor to Bombay in a week. That doesn't feel right. I don't think I'd be happy with that. That would be crazy. But I would also think that most designers are taking that into account when they come up with, how their map and unit scale interacts with their turn scale and their movement, however the movement works, right? But maybe we have it's been a while since I've played Victory in the Pacific too. But the turns, I want to say they're seasonal turns. That sounds about right, which basically means you could sail anything anywhere, right? So maybe movement's not important in a game like that, or maybe movement in the sense of keeping track of points. Maybe you need to pay attention to it in the sense of the sea zones or whatever they're called that you're going through. But maybe you're not worried about spending movement points and counting 1, 2, 3, 4, however many zones it is. I do want I want to make interesting decisions, and I would like those decisions to resemble, to whatever extent is possible, the decisions that were made on the ground at the time. You're actually not behind on the chat, folks, believe it or not. So I think, however, we are going to take this time to thank our sponsor, Noble Knight, with a brief spot from them. So take it away, Noble Knight. We'll be right back.
Here at Noble Knight Games, we've been carefully growing the world's largest selection of board games, role-playing games and dice, war games, miniatures and paints, card games, and more. Going on 25 years now. Our rustic castle contains more.
Did that freeze during that? Let me know if that froze. I don't know what's going on with that. I'll try and play it again. See what happens.
Here at Noble Knight Games, we've been carefully growing the world's largest selection of board games, role-playing games and dice, war games, miniatures and paints, card games, and more. Going on 25 years now. Our rustic castle contains more game and hobby goodness than you can shake a stick at. Complete with careful packaging and the finest customer service the land can provide. You can buy, sell, trade from anywhere in the world, just like nature intended. Noble Knight Games.
All right, so I think it played, and it's just StreamYard acting up. That's possible. StreamYard doesn't act up all that often, but occasionally it does. Maybe I'll re-upload the video clip, and hopefully that'll fix it. So anyway, thank you, Noble Knight. And don't forget about the affiliate link in the video description. If you're going to buy some stuff from Noble Knight, buy it through the affiliate link, and I'll get some credit. And hopefully I'll have an update for you in the next couple of weeks for where we're at with the quest for the finished trilogy. So, in any event. All right. Stop stick shaking the first what? I don't get it. Anyway. So, again, let's ask the question of do we feel, because I know I've heard people have this complaint about GCACW where they'll say, okay, well, I rolled 3 crappy die rolls for my 3 actions on this turn. So I moved 3 hexes. Yay. I needed to move 8, 9 hexes or, whatever it was. And that can certainly be frustrating. But at the same time, that shit happened. That would happen routinely. There were incidents of I forget exactly where this occurred, but you'll read the operational campaign histories and you'll see something about such and such a even as big as a division took the wrong fork on the road and then had to backtrack, right? So these kinds of delays are what that system is modeling, and this happened in the Civil War all the time, right? And it happens, that kind of thing happens a little less as the war goes on, but there are little tweaks that happen to the rules that take effect as things go on, right? So in some of the early games, you don't get that extra +1 for Confederate activations or leader activations or whatever it is, right? So in On to Richmond 2, it kind of works like that. The Confederates, I think, don't get their +1, but they do get a +1 for leader activation, but the Union, in turn, doesn't get a full leader activation unless they roll a 6 or maybe a 5, depending on how much stuff they have to activate, which is usually no more than 3 units at a time. So we are, Alistair, you're killing me over here. So we're going to be, we're not very far at all, but I'm waiting for the next report from Noble Knights, so it's all good. So Greg Grant mentions Mark Simonich's interesting governor, as he puts it, on French command and control in France 40 to assimilate the historic cluster. That was the French response. Command penalties, friction, and war should be more common. So I'm kind of reminded of how it works, and I've said this before that I feel like the best France 1940 game I've personally played is the Blitzkrieg Legend, the OCS France 1940 game. And shit. No, the shit show is on Tuesday. I'll have to fix that. Sorry about that. That show is tomorrow. I don't update the entire text every time. So thank you for mentioning that. I'll try to remember to get that updated. I'm not going to try and do it live on the air though. So the chit show is tomorrow, not Thursday. We were at one point on Thursday. All right, where was I? So I feel like the most organic modeling of that French situation that you describe is in the Blitzkrieg Legend, because the system just handles it kind of naturally in 2 ways. One is through the just amount of supply that you get. Now, the French have plenty of supply. They have a lot of units. They, in particular, have tons of artillery. However, their action ratings tend to be lower than the German action ratings, which should not shock anybody. But what is interesting, and this is not the only place in OCS that this appears, but it's the one that springs to mind immediately, where the French units, and I think most of the British units as well, and possibly the Dutch and Belgian units, all have a lower action rating on their move side, which is very interesting, which means that if you uproot them from the position that they were ready to fight in, that suddenly they become less prepared. And the action rating 3 unit, which is a pretty good unit in terms of that particular game, now is suddenly an action rating 2, and you're looking at something like a -2 or -3 on your surprise roll. That's a significant factor. So Fiddle70 says the entire Fields of Fire core system is all about command and control in company-sized units. The combat mostly runs on its own. It's about getting people to go where you want with the command points that you get. I mean, I'm completely on board with that as a general idea, and I don't know that that's a problem anybody had with Fields of Fire. I think the problem they had is they couldn't figure the game out from the Brew book. So there's that. But those people who have figured it out speak very highly of that game. So clearly not. That's absolutely right. All right, so Mike Reed mentions GDW ILA. Wow, I haven't thought about that in a long time. The Russians were limited in their divisional activations, chosen the turn ahead, plus free activations for leaders stacked with Benningsen. That's interesting. Certainly, all of the kind of Civil War is kind of up front in my head at the moment, but all of the things that I said about the difficulties that historical commanders faced about command and control also apply in the Napoleonic Wars, right? And this is one of the reasons why Napoleon personally was very cagey about giving his commanders independent commands. And why, which is in turn why a lot of them stunk when they sent them off to be an independent commands. Grunyard Rich says, control is how the commander is informed or implements decisions during the battle, generally based on feedback systems. Yes, but most war games, there are exceptions, but those tend to be maybe more exercises than games. Don't model those CCIR type of things directly, right? You may have some of those factors built into the system, but you're not like seeing that up front. So Mike Welker, thanks for stopping by. Eric Goebel mentions Storm of Steel with the command range of HQs. Okay, so we are talking about the decision game Joe Miranda Storm of Steel rather than any of the other 3 games called Storm of Steel, which I think is I'm with Mark Ruggiero on this. I think that is a criminally underrated, not a perfect game. Don't get me wrong. Same deal with War Between the States. Not perfect games, but there's really a lot to like in those as well. So, Bernadotte had his moments. We tend to poo-poo Bernadotte because Davout hated him. But Napoleon did make him a marshal for a reason. And he did have his moments. He also had his bad moments. So don't get me wrong. There you go. And there's video, right? We also have video as a fallback if we're just having trouble with something. But sometimes there's video on a game and sometimes there isn't. But there should be plenty of videos on Fields of Fire. I'm in principle fine with any of these mechanisms, much more so than I am with just hand waving it and saying there are no limitations, right? Other approaches that we have seen are, for example, in a card-driven game where we have, I'm inclined to use Empire of the Sun as my example here, where you have, you play a card and you can play it either for the operation that's on the card or for the ops points, which you can then use to conduct an operation. And it's generally more efficient to use it to play the card for the operation that's on the card, but sometimes that's not what you need to get done at that exact moment. So, and then you use those points that you get to conduct the operation with to activate units that you can then send on the operation. And I think that is a perfectly viable way to do it as well. And that's not fundamentally dissimilar from the way you would see that same mechanism happen in a Paths of Glory or whatever, or For the People or whatever else. John Stanley, thank you so much. Mentions To Lose a Battle, France 1940 by Alistair Horn. Great book on the slow response and friction in the French army response in May 1940. I should check that out, actually, if I ever get to anything read. So this is not impossible. This is not impossible. But again, though, if you look at the campaigns, you'll find out that Bernadotte did perform well more than once. It's not like he was a shitheel the entire time. So these are really good. In fact, I highly recommend Epic History TV in general. But they did like a big 3, 4, 5, whatever it was, part series on ranking Napoleon's marshals, and it was actually really good. And there's like a little addendum on there too of those Napoleonic or French, at least, generals who weren't marshals, a couple of whom were very good. So Eugene was easily the best relative of Napoleon to command troops, because Napoleon's brothers were dopes. So Brant, thanks for stopping by. Now, one can always get frustrated with these mechanisms too, right? One can get frustrated in a card-driven game where the card you need is just not coming up. One can get frustrated in a system like BCS. Man, you guys should have seen what I was rolling for the 12th SS Panzer Division. Holy shit. It was nothing but natural twos and threes. They didn't do dick the entire battle. So there's that. Now, actually, this is another, thank you, Carl, for bringing this up, because this is an interesting, all right. So an example of, there might be more than this, but an example of a game that works the way Carl is describing here would be East Front. Their World War II game, which you can combine with West Front and Eurofront to simulate the entire war in Europe. And it's a Columbia block game that's exactly the kind of block game you think of when you hear block game, where one side is hidden. But what you have is you also have an HQ block, and you spend, as you lose steps out of units, you'll rotate the block, and the number at the top will get smaller and smaller and smaller, right? So for HQs, that number does not represent steps. It represents sort of, I forget what the terminology is, but it's like command points. And you basically conduct offensives by spending a command point off an HQ, and that allows you to activate so many units, and then you can go and do stuff with those units. And then if you want to activate more units, you got to spend more points off the HQ. And then at the end of the turn, you might get some point, or the beginning of the turn, you might get some of those points back. But you do still have that thing where you are forced to make the decision: do I spend these points now, or I really want to start this big offensive next turn, or do I let the points pile up in the meantime? I really like that. So there should always be a B plan. Mark, sometimes there's no A plan. I just FYI, just to say that out loud. Plan? What plan? What plan are we talking about? But this is obviously true, right? I mean, you should have, in much the same way that I am going to assume that I will fail a die roll, I should have a plan of what to do when I inevitably fail that die roll. It's the same thing. What do I do if I don't get the one card that I needed? If I'm playing Combat Commander, I throw all my cards away and flip the table. If I'm playing something else, I might have to have a more mature solution. John Mogg, these are real solid games. I don't own them anymore. That is a situation that will probably eventually resolve itself, but Davu in Independent Command, though, that's a thing. Davu did okay, but a number of other guys got sent to the Peninsular War and really shat the place up. So the German plan B is dig in and hold on with your fingernails, I suppose. So So Vincenzo says, does a CDG, and Mark may have answered this actually. That's a great, hold on, I'll get to that. That's so good, I'm totally doing that. Does a CDG like Empire of the Sun simulate, we are ready, but Washington isn't, and we're preparing, but Washington wants it up stat? So I think how I would sort of narrate that, right? Say, okay, I see an opening. I'm playing, for example, the Americans, and I see an opening that I really want to do this turn. Then we draw the cards for the turn, and I just don't have the card that I need to do what I wanted to do, right? My sort of way to narrate that is probably something very much like this is, okay, so we can't get this done for whatever back-end logistical reason, or it's tied up in committee back at the Pentagon or whatever. That is how I would fill this gap in my head with narrative when that kind of thing would happen. And the great thing is one can always blame one's own incompetence on bad die rolls and bad card draws. So you're always covered, right? This is a brilliant idea, and I may have to do this. Unfortunately, I will not be doing this in time for Buckeye Game Fest. Also, I'm going to disappoint everybody at Buckeye Game Fest. I will not have t-shirts for basically everybody this year. So there's that. Scott Bell, thanks for stopping by. Mark says this almost never happens in Empire of the Sun if you conduct a tour. Yeah, absolutely. Empire of the Sun is one of those games, though, and a lot of people consider it hard to play, and I actually will agree with that, but that's not because the game's exceptionally complicated. I don't think Empire of the Sun is exceptionally complicated. It's not Chutes and Ladders, but it's a moderate complexity game that has a very intricately interwoven mechanics of everything from the top of the line, down to the bottom, that if you don't understand what all the bells and buttons and whistles and levers are, you're probably going to play fairly poorly, even if you know the rules, right? And some people will learn the rules and then learn how to play, and some people will have a sense of how to play before knowing the rules. So, yeah, this could be it. Or, hey, the Hornet's laid up for repairs. It ain't ready yet. Sorry. To touch on, was that in? Yeah, that was in Midway. I don't know that it was the Hornet, but you know what I'm saying. So there we go. Vince Ree is here, and thanks, Alistair, for saying hello. So no, but the t-shirt idea is a great idea. I love that idea. I need new t-shirts anyway. Whew, interesting. Okay, so this is another thing that can affect that, right? Is the weather. We can easily see, and you could see this happening live if you watch the Tabletop's Edge playing World in Flames, where, I got these big plans, up, shit, blizzard. There's the weather is terrible, and we're not going to get any of this stuff done. So that can throw your plans in a bind as well. But at least you get to make the decision, right? And some people are not comfortable unless they make the decision. But the risk of that is, as we know, a risk anyway, is that the player of one of these games has way more information than the historical people given the orders did. And given that that's the case, I can maybe live with a little more uncertainty in terms of what can I activate, how much stuff can I get off. That is not to say that it is not frustrating sometimes when you're just not getting the rolls or not getting the cards or whatever it is. It is totally Yorktown. There we go. That is totally frustrating. I completely sympathize with that. Now, and maybe it's so frustrating that it spoils a game for you. That's plausible. I was about to say I don't think that has spoiled a game for me, but then I'm wrong. Combat Commander, it spoiled Combat Commander for me, where I felt like I had zero agency because here's my turn. I throw the maximum number of cards away, draw 3 more useless cards, and sit and watch the other guy do the same thing and throw all his cards away. And then it's my turn, and I throw all my cards away, or the max. You can't just discard your whole hand. You have a maximum number of cards you can change out every turn. And you just sit there doing that for 2 or 3 turns in a row, and that sucks. That does not feel good. So, and it's, but that doesn't bother some people. And okay, that's fine, but it bothered me. This is the Cleveland Guardians now. We've already had this conversation. I was rooting for the Spiders as well. So I had, so the trouble is I had a hoodie, and Spring that does my shirts kind of cocked it up. Maybe they're better at that now, and I should revisit that topic because I'd like one, to be honest. I have a regular sweatshirt, and I think that's available on the store. I should check that. So I did not play the French. I forget who I played, but this particular game was out of one of the Mediterranean things. I think somebody was playing the Germans and somebody was playing maybe it was the Italians. I don't know. Somebody was playing the Greeks, something like that. Mark Hodgkinson points out that one of the two sides in Battle for Normandy has an economic way to handle command control or combat supply, but as I recall, it's been a while, even though I've done video on it, it's been a while, and a lot of games have passed through my head since then. Do you only spend those points to fire barrages? Am I misremembering that? Because if so, then you can still do combats, but you may end up having to do soak-off combats to satisfy mandatory attack restrictions. So I'd have to recall exactly how that works. And at this point, I will wait to recall exactly how that works until the new one shows up. So 222 people. Holy cow. 79 people on Twitter, 141 on YouTube, 1 each on Twitch and Facebook. So I go through, so my merch store, there's a merch store. There's a link in the video description. I've got a whole bunch of t-shirts. I've got a couple of coffee mugs. I've got a pint glasses. I've got a backpack. I've got a couple of other things. I should do a hoodie though. Because like I said, I would like one. You never know when you're going to go to a game convention. You never know whether the room that you'll be playing in will be the temperature of an oven or a meat cooler. I can live with the meat cooler normally, but if it's oven-like, then I don't really like that. Oh, Carl. There are 100% mandatory attacks in Battle for Normandy. However, there aren't just automatic mandatory attacks. You must satisfy mandatory attack requirements if you are attacking. If you are not attacking, then you can just sit there and you don't have a mandatory attack requirement. So it's a little softer than like a classic Anzio soak-off attack mechanic, and therefore I find it more palatable, even though that is not a mechanic that I not even particularly, I don't like that mechanic. That's Vincenzo, this is because you've got to have a plan A. There is no plan A? What plan A? So, and this is one of the things that people don't like. There's a number of complaints that I've heard about the Battle for Normandy. Okay, a couple of which are made by me, and then a couple other points that I think are nonsense and I think are not serious problems at all. One of which is the mandatory attacks. And like I said, it's not a mechanic I favor, but I can live with it in Battle for Normandy because it only applies when you are attacking, and it doesn't apply in every single kind of terrain. So it may not come up even if you are attacking. A lot of times it will. But when you start getting into like the heavy terrain, like the bocage and stuff like that, chances are pretty good that you don't have to worry about it. So, okay. I strongly recommend the second edition of Storm of Steel, and the reason is the update kit. So, this isn't a true second edition. It is, Mark Hodgkins has got some info here on some clarifications on the Battle for Normandy supply mechanics. I'll get to that in a second. So first of all, thank you, Alistair, for the support. It is much appreciated. So there's really not a second edition of Storm of Steel. What you had is an edition of Storm of Steel, and then you had an update kit, which later on became not available by itself, but they started bundling it with the main game. And that is what you get when you buy the second edition. It's the same box with all the same stuff in it, with a sticker that says second edition, and you got the extra second edition stuff. I did an unboxing of the second edition not too long ago. The additional stuff, which does include like a counter sheet or half a counter sheet or something like that, which is mostly naval counters, but there's some other stuff in there too, and there's some play aids and stuff like that, and a CD-ROM, which I'm aware seems really primitive nowadays, but remember, it's not a new game. And you got a CD-ROM with a bunch of additional play aids on it. For this reason, you can download a lot of that material, and if you're prepared to download it and print it all yourself, then I guess okay. I think you'll have to run that down on Consim World. And for $100, maybe you want to save the money, but I dumped my first edition and went and I bought a second edition off a dock at WBC last year. Cause it's a game that I think, again, not a flawless game, but I think it's a game that has a lot to offer, and it does not get a lot of attention. And I think it is worth people's time. So, all right. So Mark Hodgkinson mentions that Battle for Normandy has mandatory attacks, and you use 3 combat supply for a multi-hex attack, 1 for a 1-hex attack with artillery, and 1 for artillery by itself. This sounds right to me. It's just been a long time since I've played that. So the last time the last I noodled with it was when I was doing video on it. So, and it's been a while. It should. It should. I think that it should. It comes with Bismarck, not the Bismarck, but Bismarck personally. But in any case, what games... Ooh, this is an interesting question. Grunyard Rich asks, what games allow a player to disrupt opponent's command and control? Offhand, there may be cards that... there's an obvious example that I'll get to in a second. There might be cards that do it in Combat Commander. I'm not positive about that. I maybe haven't played enough Combat Commander to recall that correctly. Thomas Bandy, thanks for stopping by. Excellent on the Sears. I like Stephen W. Sears. I think he's done all the books I've got from him, which isn't all of them, but it's quite a few, are very good. The obvious example here is Great Battles of History. Now, they don't all work this way, but some of them do. And I believe Great Battles of Alexander is one that does directly. And Mark will yell at me if I get it wrong. So there's, you basically run you activate leaders who in turn activate units, and you activate one at a time, alternating, and then you activate them in reverse leadership order. So the worst leaders go first and the best leaders go last. However, there is a rule called trumping, where a better leader can seize control of somebody else's initiative. It's actually a really neat mechanic. It works really well in Great Battles of Alexander specifically, although if Alexander himself is not on the map, maybe he'll be less successful with it, because the other Macedonian leaders are, as you'd expect, not quite as good as Alexander. But yes, there is that. But all you're doing is basically sticking yourself in the activation order, right? You're not really blocking somebody else from being able to do what they want to do. Other examples would be, say, in OCS, if you get a big supply dump captured, that can be disastrous if you manage to have that misfortune occur to you. I have both had it happen to me and have done it to other players. There we go. So Hannibal and Skip, yeah, good, fair enough. Hannibal and Scipio ought to be pretty good, right? I'm a fan. Having read Liddell Hart's Greater Than Napoleon, I'm a fan of Scipio. So when we are talking, well, I have been talking about Battle for Normandy. Yes, it is a pretty big monster game at this point. I haven't looked at Burning Banners. I may need to. Let me know if, what the fuck? Let me know if there's any hitching on the show here, folks. I just had the computer lock up again. It appears to have recovered. Hopefully everything is okay. I passed on Burning Banners. I am regretting that decision. I may send somebody up to Connecticut with some money in May to secure a copy for me of that and other things. So this is fair. Scipio Emilianus is less awesome. So let's put it that way. And this is true. A number of CDGs have reaction cards that will let you do stuff to disrupt whatever the enemy is doing or whatever. I am also reminded of, what would be another alternative? I had another example in my head of being able to disrupt somebody else's command control. Last Chance for Victory, the Dan Sickles rule in Last Chance for Victory. So as you might know, and this is kind of the last piece of the, how to handle command control restrictions, and this has already been mentioned, is specific orders. Let's call it specific orders, because the written orders from the Dean Essex School of Written Orders are not the only way to handle this, right? You can have GBACW, for example, where you have orders that a given brigade or division or whatever will be in, and that will affect what they can do and how effective they are. But in, say, Civil War Brigade series or Line of Battle or whatever, you have written orders. You write the order, and then you make some rolls to determine how long it's going to take the order to take effect, and then you can start acting on that new order. And until then, you are still acting on the old orders. Well, the Dan Sickles rule in Last Chance for Victory is basically an opportunity, and there's a condition that's you have to meet to do this. But if you meet that condition, then what can happen is that the Confederate player can write an order for a Union unit, and then the Union unit has to abide by that order until Meade rides out there and says, hey, what the fuck are you doing? So, and that's the Dan Sickles rule to reflect Devil Dan's activities on the second day of Gettysburg. So there's that too. But written orders, and at least in the Dean-esque implementation, are pretty rare. We don't really see anybody. If anybody else is aware of a written order system that's not that, let me know. Certainly there are other games that have something similar with something like plotted simultaneous movement or something like that. I can't wait to get to Winter's Victory. I'm just not going to get to Winter's Victory until winter. So this is true too. Men of Iron does have some kind of command jump rule. I forget exactly what this is called. It's been a while since I've played that too. And as Mike Reed points out, we are just not talking enough about TCS. I think TCS is really interesting. I do feel like the base mechanics are just basic mechanics. But once you start getting into the op sheets, then the game becomes really interesting. The heart of that game is in the op sheets, and in any TCS game in which you either don't use the op sheets, and there are a couple of them, or in which there's so little on the map, like Goose Green, that there's not much point to using the op sheets. That's not really right, but it doesn't feel good using the op sheets with forces that small. Then it's less interesting, but I think that's the heart and soul of that game. You've also got the plotted simultaneous movement of something like Flat Top, where you're just writing your moves down and the other person's writing their moves down, and at the end you figure it all out and see what happens. I don't mind that. A lot of people don't like that mechanic. Certainly, though, I mean, it doesn't. Every game with hidden simultaneous plotted movement is not Star Force, where where in addition to all of that, you have trigonometry. So there's that. This is another good point. Meandering Mike points out interception, which is a rule that we see in a lot of, say, Napoleonic games. I'm pretty sure there's a rule for it in the Napoleonic Wars. There may be a rule for it in For the People as well. Not sure I remember, even though I looked this up not that long ago. And as Mark Hodgkinson points out, there's the Marcus Stumpner variant rules for Library of Napoleonic Battles that I haven't really looked at. So Vincenzo, thank you so much. Much appreciated. The support is greatly appreciated. It says, in his experience with professional war games, realistic C3 equals dull games. I don't imagine that is a controversial statement. Once a plan is launched, you can't pivot until the next decision cycle, given the scale and parade comes before the enemies. This is true, but, is this a reasonable limitation based on what the thing's trying to simulate? If it is, then I say it's okay, but that does not necessarily, it's okay from a simulation standpoint, but that does not necessarily mean that it feels good when you're doing it. And Mark clarifies that it does have interception. I was playing with, right around the same time I was fooling with For the People late last year, I want to say, I was also doing Frederick the Great. So I may have I think I mixed those two up, even though I've played quite a bit more For the People than Frederick the Great. All right, so I'd like to look at this series. So this is the series is called, this is confusing. This is super confusing branding. The series is called Viva l'Empereur. It's the games, as Mike Reed points out, they're mostly from Legion War Games. And the titles all have La Bataille or Bataille or something like that in the title. So it's not all La Bataille, but there's La Bataille de Hanau, which, contrary to the name, is not a La Bataille series game. There's other games in the series. Would be Quattro Bataille in España and Trois Bataille in Allemagne, 3 battles in Germany. So there are a number of interesting games in that series. They are well regarded. As I recall, they are regimental level, which is an attractive scale for Napoleonic, in my opinion, which kind of avoids having to deal with battalions, which you would have to do with La Bataille. And as Mark points out, For the People does have intersection, Frederick the Great does not. So I would like very much to look at these, but I have not had the opportunity to do that yet. So the one thing about this hat is I should wear it more because it is very, very stiff and hurts my forehead. So there's that. But I'm having a bad hair day, so there's that. A lot of games. I'm trying to remember what game it was that Frederick the Great so early that it's like if that doesn't have interception, okay. There was another game that I felt like really needed interception, and it doesn't have it. That game may have been War Between the States, actually. This is complicated. So when we talk about the La Bataille series, that is an outgrowth of La Bataille de la Moskva by Larry Groves in the early 70s, then there are two current publishers. This is very complicated, but the two current publishers are Marshall Enterprises, which reliably does about a game a year, and Clash of Arms, which does a game whenever Ed says they're ready to do a game. There is some kind of friendly agreement between the two organizations to not step on each other's toes there. I know Mark liked the original, and a lot of people still do. It's a quite different game from what it eventually evolved into. There are at least 3 different. Yes, so I'm Alistair, man, I'm with you. I'm with you here, but unfortunately, my wife won't let me shave my head anymore. So, the Bible Board Game says he's not sure if he'd enjoy written orders, but he wants to know how the commanders felt. See, it's actually really awesome. When we did it in Line of Battle, it felt really good. You'd throw a little flourish in here and there. You do a little bit of role playing as either Bobby Lee or a Little Mac in this case, and always end your order from Little Mac saying, "And whatever you do, don't attack." Just to be funny, you are outnumbered 17-1. But no, I think it's a really immersive way to do it. It does add overhead, I got to tell you, because you're also going to kind of dick around, just thinking of what your wording is going to be like, because you're going to be beholden to that. It does require a certain type of player to be willing to kind of be, I don't want to say willing, but to kind of be willing to go with the flow of the sort of light role-playing element that you have with the written orders. If you have the right people, it will go really well. It is absolutely unsuitable for tournament play for that reason, because you'll get somebody gaming that system. And, I don't know if Dean put it quite this way in the rule book, but the bottom line is that, don't play with those people. Or don't pick this game to play in a tournament situation. So, this is a good point. Yes. So the Hexasim Napoleonic Battle Games. So this is the Eagles of France series. As Mike Reed points out, this series is moving to Fellowship of Simulations. And their next game in the series, guess what it's going to be? Yes, it's going to be ILAO. So I don't know what the timetable is on that, but I have all 4 of these, and I have only noodled with Quatre Bras, but it also has kind of like a static order system, kind of similar to the way it works in GBACW. Not really that similar. Because you could set like geographic objectives. There's like these objective points throughout the map that you use to give orders with. And it's actually pretty neat. It looks pretty neat. And I'd like to play a full battle of it out. At some point, I know I asked last week if we were going to have if people would object if I did a non-wargaming topic, which I have done a couple of times, but I'm reluctant to do that. But what I think I will, and I will do, if I do that, I will, and in this type of format, I will do it as its own separate thing on a different night. However, what I think I will do, I don't know how soon we'll see this, is a show on RPGs from wargame publishers. So basically, there's 3 publishers There's 4 publishers we're talking about. Those publishers are GDW, SPI, Avalon Hill, and West End Games. TSR doesn't count. TSR was started to publish Dungeons and Dragons. Although they did war games, were not fundamentally a war game publisher, nor did they have any history of war games as a publishing house prior to 74. So I forget what it's called, but yes, this will be the next one will be coming out in 1812. 1812. We're not talking about 1807. I thought it was 1807. There are, you know what? There are I forget who this is. There is a publisher that does diceless war games. This is not a popular. This is not a popular avenue for war game designers historically, but there are examples of diceless war games. FASA got started as a company doing third-party traveler stuff. I think FASA was fundamentally a role-playing company, even though they did some war games as well. And as Mike Reed points out, TSR, yeah, this is true. And they did a couple other things too, very early on, like Don't Give Up the Ship and a couple other things. But those are not things that had huge impact or huge enduring impact anyway, except insofar as they influenced D&D. So in any case, when we do that show, whenever that is, we will not be talking about TSR. Because I could do a show on the other hand, I could do a show on the war games that TSR did. And I think that might be an interesting show topic. We're done clipping for tonight. We got most of the game punched. If you watch the unboxing video, you'll know that the envelope that clearly said "do not bend," the postman said, "Fuck you, we're bending." So it got bent to get stuck in the mailbox, but it's not a big deal. Some of the counters are falling out of the sheet, but that was going to happen anyway, right? All right, Nicholas Palmer in his book from the 1970s mentioned the idea of actually writing orders and check if the commanders got them in games with more than one player for each side. There's also, let's not forget about Kriegspiel, right? Where you are very much limited by information, right? Now, it's not so much a command control limitation, although the referees can always say your troops didn't do what you said they should do. That could happen, but you've also got very limited information. You've just got what that was they were feeding you. Public, yeah, there you go. That might explain why I didn't register that. So this is actually a good point. In that sense, I would include Victory Games on that list too, on the strength of the James Bond 007 RPG, which is an outstanding RPG. Bloodstones. I just today learned about Bloodstones. It is a fantasy strategy wargamey thing. I don't know a lot about it. I did not know it was diceless. Don't forget that diceless doesn't necessarily mean there's no random element, right? There's one publisher, and I forget who it is, that makes it a point to do no random elements in their games. Friedrich. But are there random cards? I mean, Combat Commander has no. I've never played Friedrich, so I'm actually asking. Yeah. What a fucking scam this is. They're basically loading Asmodee with, so the Embracer group basically has all this debt because they're incompetently run. So they're sending all the debt to Asmodee, and then they're going to spin Asmodee off to just operate at a massive deficit. So what this is the same type of bullshit that GM did with Delphi years ago, where they pushed all the debt over to a division, and then they spun the division out. Sorry, folks. I'm not the world's biggest fan of Asmodee. I found this to be very lame. I mean, I worked for Delphi, so this is a bit of a sore spot. Okay. So that's SPI. No, trust me, we shan't be forgetting about SPI's glorious Dallas RPG designed by James Dunnigan himself. So, yeah, but there's cards, right? You have a random element in the card. So that it's diceless is not necessarily, that isn't, well, we do say diceless, but randomless, I suppose, is more accurate. I've played diceless RPGs. I played the Amber diceless RPG, for example, and it's cool. I don't know that I'd want to play like a regular game of it. Yep, this is and fired everyone. Everyone's fired. There's no creative staff left for any of these subsidiaries at this point. So this would have been a brilliant idea had they sold more than 3 copies of the Dallas RPG. So there you go. I could bring it. I've mentioned this before. A number of like RPG, the YouTube channels or podcasts or whatever, became aware in the last year or two of this. Hey, this is crazy. This did it at a Dallas RPG, and it's by these Wargame people. And they tried it, and the consensus seems to be that it's actually fairly interesting. It's like weird and limited, but fairly interesting nonetheless. Bonaparte Marengo, is this the Rachel Simmons game? But again, I thought there was a random element to this, even though there may or may not be dice. Yes, this is exactly right. This is the same basic idea when I say that there's no difference fundamentally between a point-to-point map and an area map. You have points, and you have connections between the points, and that's it. It's just art at that point. Whether you use dice or cards or a spinner or whatever for random number generation, you are still fundamentally generating random numbers. No, there is. I just can't remember the name of the publishers. Well, this is what they said. I've never seen any of their games either. And if I did, I'd probably remember who the hell it was. I find that, I disagree with this. My dice, they both have long memories and they hate me. I mean, certainly not, but in this era, yes. Later on, we would see the Stargate SG-1 RPG. We would see a good dozen Star Trek RPGs. There's been 2 separate Firefly RPGs, 3, because Traveler is the first one. So yes, we've seen these, but almost all of them are, and there's a Leverage RPG. If anybody has seen the show Leverage, the guy that was the either series creator or showrunner or lead scriptwriter or whatever, John Rogers, who was the lead person on the TV show Leverage, also is a big gamer and wrote the Leverage RPG. And that's not even a genre thing. That's just some kind of crime deal I never watched the show. I have no idea. It's supposed to have been good. All right. So we are talking about the Rachel Simmons games, the Napoleon at Marengo. Now the Bonaparte at Marengo just came back out in a fancy new edition from somebody. I forget who. Ooh, this is true. I do. Yeah, I think this is true, and I think this was Margaret Weiss and or the Cortex system. I might be wrong about that, because by the time this came out, the show itself had already jumped the shark, so I was no longer interested at that time. There was a Rocky and Bullwinkle RPG, which I want to say was from either West End or maybe Pace Setter, something like that. You could look all this up on RPG Geek, but which I am not going to look up the Rocky and Bullwinkle RPG. Thank you, Stacking Limit. Primetime Adventures. Who's the designer of Primetime Adventures? Because I had some contact with whoever that was at one point. There's also an Action Heroes RPG, which is Chris Helton's RPG, which I think is supposed to sort of generate TV-like plots as well. I feel like the current Star Trek RPG from Modiphius, which is a 2D20 system, does probably the best job that I have personally seen at sort of emulating the story beats of episodic television. Let me put it this way. Vincenzo says Matt Wilson. Okay, thank you, Vincenzo. West End did do Paranoia, but Paranoia has been through a number of different publishers at this point. The property currently resides for Mongoose. I bought, hold on, I'll show you. So I bought this edition of Paranoia from Mongoose. The very next day, they announced that there would be another new edition of Paranoia, and that's out now. So, which I didn't buy. One edition, Paranoia is pretty brilliant. But I figure, who cares what the system looks like at that point? I would be happy with whatever edition of Paranoia that I have. So, and Meandering Mike mentions that Margaret Weiss Productions did the BSG RPG and the Firefly RPGs and possibly Leverage as well. Although I'm not sure about that. A lot of people really like that Cortex system, which did have a definite evolution. It's different now than it was when it came out. So, and Jason W mentions so you might be surprised. There's probably an assumption that a lot of people have that most people who start playing role-playing games start with Dungeons & Dragons. Or maybe if they were of the right age at the right time and were into the right things at the right time, maybe they started with Vampire the Masquerade. Those folks might be surprised at the number of people that were brought into RPGs via Palladium, via either Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Robotech. Palladium Books is still around. Kevin Symbiotic he is still symbioting his way through life. And they somehow managed to endure. So I have not seen Stigler tonight. Did I miss him? What's going on? All right, so speaking of RPGs, we've got a couple of minutes left. So I'm going to mention that tomorrow at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, we will have the Chit Show with Dan, hopefully, and definitely Clint Warren Davy, and we'll talk about 1 hour World War II. Steve Jackson, yeah, but Steve Jackson Games was not a predominantly war game company, right? We don't talk a lot about Steve Jackson Games here, and that's not because I have some kind of distaste for Steve Jackson or Steve Jackson Games. It's just that they're predominantly an RPG company and have been since at least the early 80s. Mark, thanks for stopping by. So tomorrow we will have the Chit Show with Dan and Clint. However, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern, we will have Traveler Tuesday. And I will be bringing you a flip through and review of This is Free Trader Beowulf, Shannon Appleklein's delightful system history of Traveler. That's pretty good. They did one page Bulge and Ogre, and there's a pile of them actually. But yeah, I mean we're not talking. They weren't SPI, right? So a lot of people liked Ogre. So I'm an old school role play guy, I think. I like to try the new story game types of things, but I often feel like I don't really fully get them. And I haven't had the time in recent years to do any of that stuff because my avenue for doing that was going to Games on Demand at Origins. And first of all, there was no Origins because there was COVID. And then there was no Games on Demand because there was COVID. And I think that's back now. But, in the last couple of years, I haven't had the time. So, and Car Wars is a lot of fun. I played Car Wars with Steve Jackson, which is pretty years and years and years ago at a Gen Con, I believe. And I think Steve was at an Origins a couple of years ago too. I don't know if that's going to happen again this year, but they did not vend last year, so I don't know what's going on. So I at one point had probably 3 linear feet of GURPS 3rd edition product. And it's mostly gone. The stuff that I kept some of the core stuff from the 3rd edition. I kept the 4th edition stuff that I bought, which was not that much. And I kept the GURPS Traveler stuff. So I still like GURPS. I wouldn't use it for Traveler, but despite that, some of the GURPS Traveler material is really good. So, all right, folks, we are trajectorating toward a conclusion here. So Pretty Salbian says that you can adopt it to nearly. It doesn't work for absolutely everything, but it does work for most things. It does work at least acceptably well for most things. Where it begins to break down is like relatively powerful superheroes, or if you're trying to play gods. In that case, you are better off using something like Nobilis or something like that. Nobilis is a diceless RPG that works on a silent bidding system. So you basically have a pool of points and you can bid points and then reveal that, and then whoever bid higher gets their way, right? It's actually a pretty revelatory at the time diceless mechanic. And there's a lot of really good setting books for GURPS too. That's true too. Alistair Logie says that Noble Knight has the 30-pound ogre box for $95. I can vouch that it is $35 and larger than many small children. Renegade Legion was from FASA. That was their attempt to get Lightning to strike a second time. It was never as popular as Battletech. I want to say somebody else may have picked it up and is redoing some of the stuff, but I don't know how far that effort got. I had a lot. I had like 100 or 110 or something like that GURPS books at one point. And I got rid of I kept the core book and the companions and 2 or 3 other books. And then the 4th edition stuff. And since then, Steve Jackson and his games do not appear to be particularly interested in supporting GURPS anymore. But there is still a fairly robust GURPS community if you know where to look. There's a very active GURPS Discord server, for example. And there are certain things that I would theoretically be willing to run that GURPS would be my first choice on. Traveler's just not one of them. So we will, by the way, be playing RuneQuest this Friday, assuming lightning doesn't strike and the house doesn't, power go out again or something like that. I could do a show just on GURPS, but we do occasionally do the Classless Character Show, which is our live RPG show. And we talk a lot about GURPS on there because Pat, my co-host, is a huge GURPS fan, but we haven't done a show in quite a long time. Remember that GURPS' original release was Man to Man, which was a literal fantasy combat tactical war game. With basically no role-playing elements except those that you yourself brought to the table. So, all right, folks, we are out of time. I want to thank everybody for coming out. Don't forget to like the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already subscribed. There's a whole bunch of ways in the video description listed down and linked below to help support the channel. At the top of the list are the Patreon. Thank you, patrons. You'll get a shout out here in a second. And the Noble Knight affiliate link. Noble Knight Games is the official sponsor of the Counterclipping show. And if you shop through the affiliate link, I get a little bit of a kickback in the form of store credit, which I use to purchase, hopefully soon, the Finnish trilogy about the war between Finland and the Soviet Union during World War II. That looks really neat. And I can't wait to get it. So thank you, Noble Knight, and thank you, patrons, and thank everybody for coming out tonight, and we'll see you all again soon.